Welcome to Safe on Deck. For episode 50, I sat down with Captain Christopher Hill on board the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower in Norfolk, Virginia. Captain Hill earned his Wings of Gold as a Naval Flight Officer in 1997, and he was selected to fly the E-2C Hawkeye, flying in operations Southern Watch, Desert Fox, and Deliberate Forge during his time at Airborne Command and Control Squadron 126. Captain Hill went on to serve in VAW 124 as a Weapons and Tactics Instructor, VAW 115 as a Department Head, and again VAW 124 as the Executive Officer and Commanding Officer, where he led the squadron during Operations Enduring Freedom and Inherent Resolve. As part of the Naval Nuclear Power Training program, Captain Hill was selected to serve as Executive Officer on board the USS George H.W. Bush and Commanding Officer of the USS Arlington, before ultimately serving as Commanding Officer of the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower during their highly-lauded 2023-2024 deployment to the U.S. Fifth Fleet Area of Operations. Captain Hill currently serves as the Interim Commanding Officer of the USS Harry S. Truman, forward deployed conducting combat operations in support of Operation Prosperity Guardian in the Red Sea. Thanks, as always, for taking the time to listen. In the future, I plan to continue to share similar interviews with both current and retired military aviators. If you have a question or a suggestion for a future interview, please leave it as a comment below. Safe on Deck, episode 50, with Captain Christopher Hill. Enjoy. Chowdah, it has been, I always say this, I feel like on all interviews, a little bit of back and forth to get someone's schedule lined up. You, sir, are the CO of a nuclear aircraft carrier. I am a mere JO on an LPD. Our schedules are not always perfectly lined up, but you are nothing but awesome, and I really appreciate the back and forth, the scheduling to make this work. So first off, this is the first carrier I've ever been on in my entire Navy career, so it's an incredible honor to walk on this ship. And I think I mentioned before we got going, I have never had someone request a guest more than you, believe it or not. And I, at the time, genuinely did not even know your story. I've had so many people, folks that listen to the podcast, reach out and say, hey, you need to figure out a way to talk to Captain Hill. And I was like, I'll try, but I don't know this gentleman. You made it happen. So first off, I want to say thanks to Yank, who came up with an idea that connected us. But second off, thank you to you for being willing to do it.
Hey, no problem, man.
Start them all the same way, so we'll start yours the same way as well. Where were you born?
Born in Quincy, Massachusetts.
The accent did not give it away at all.
No, birthplace at Dunkin' Donuts and two presidents.
Which two?
That's the question I ask other people. So John Adams, John Quincy Adams, which I am technically related to them through one line of my ancestry. Not that it matters for this interview, but it's a thing.
That is awesome.
Yep.
Any touch points on aviation early on? Because obviously we know where you got in the career, but from that part of the world, I feel like, yes, no, maybe the military as well?
So my dad was an ABE on the USS Kitty Hawk in 1970 to 71. And so I was born in 74. It seemed like such a long time ago that he was in the military. It wasn't. So as a kid growing up, I got to wear his uniforms. I destroyed all of them. And he would tell me a few stories here and there. And I said, you know what, I'm going to join the Navy. So I went ahead and did it. His only advice was to become an officer because of the things that he'd seen. ABEs, Aviation Boatswain Made Equipment, they're like the toughest guys on the ship, the salt of the earth. They do a lot of hard work. They work crazy hours and they rarely complain. It's just a great group of people. He said actually the Marines thought they were tougher than he was. We used to have Marines on aircraft carriers. And so there was a little bit of conflict there, but all worked out in the end. Here's an interesting thing. He took a lot of pictures. He bought a camera on his deployment to the Gulf of Tonkin off of the coast of Vietnam and took all these weird pictures. Most of them were inappropriate, like people sticking up their middle finger and stuff, people in Philippines partying. And then he took a bunch of pictures of equipment, like pumps and gauges and weird stuff. So he ended up passing away in the early 2000s, unfortunately. And, part of it stemmed from his time in the Navy. But I loved him to death, and he was my dad. So eventually I was on the Kitty Hawk in 2007 and 2008 on its final deployment. So it's kind of cool, father-son. And by the way, that's not uncommon on aircraft carriers. They're around for 50-plus years. We've had a bunch here. We've had some instances where father and son were serving on the same ship at the same time. And I remember a father-daughter, they would meet every Sunday. I'd see them down by our little Starbucks cafe, just having coffee together. It was cute. So I had all these pictures, and then once I was on the Kitty Hawk, I went around to the catapult spaces. I'd knock on the door, and they'd be like, who the hell is this guy? And I'd show them the pictures, like, oh, that's this pump, and that's this gauge, and a lot of stuff hadn't changed in nearly 30 years at that point. And it was kind of a special way to connect with my dad. Like, the pictures finally made sense. At that point. And I was a department head at the time, so just strong memories there.
That's incredible. And it's interesting because I have no military background in my family, but so many of my friends, exactly that kind of that generational connection, and they want to go out and do what dad or mom, in many cases, did. And, man, that's so incredible.
Yeah, and, we got a lot of people that, I guess you could say, a lot of us will have children who will eventually go into the military, and we know friends who've done that. And you just got to keep that in mind when you meet the kids of the people you work with. You might be working with them someday. It's
Absolutely.
weird, but it could happen.
But that's a great attitude to have, too, that remembering, I don't even know the best way to say it, but like the seed corn of naval aviation is what he was talked about at VT10, right? These folks are going to go on to replace us in a good way. And so, treat them well and remember that the lessons you teach them are ones that they're going to teach others or,
right. I agree.
Cycle continues.
Totally agree.
Okay. Pilot, NFO, what were your options? What could you have gone? You could have been a SWO, a nuke. There's all these other things, as an officer.
Around 1994, there was a big cut in officer billets, and they were trying to rebuild after that. So I graduated in 96 in the ROTC program, and they said you had to go URL, so unrestricted line. The options were aviation, SWO, SEAL, or sub. And I was a poli-sci major. I had no interest in going submarines or doing the nuclear power program. So I said no. Actually, they made me do an interview, and it did not go well. Because the first thing I said is, I don't want to be here, right? So I said, I probably fit best in the aviation program, and I had terrible eyesight. So at that time, you could not get the surgery, so you had to go Naval Flight Officer. So I went that path. My intent was only to do the requisite 8 years or whatever at the time, get out and do other things, maybe become a lawyer or something like that. A lot of my friends had gone down that path, but it didn't work out that way. Here I am.
Yeah, I think it worked out in a great way, though. Okay, so in Pensacola, still at VT10, actually, even wind back before that. For us, it was API, right?
Right.
Now it's knife. So the very beginning, the first touches you get in Pensacola, there's a whiteboard up, and when you walk in one of the buildings at API, and it's got all the different aircraft where you could go as a pilot, as an NFO, all those different options. Where could you have gone finishing your time? We'll talk about, hopefully, is it VT4 or VT10?
So I did VT10. The options were F-14s, E-2Cs. They had just taken away the A-6, so that was like an exciting thing to be a bombardier navigator, but that was gone. P-3s, I think that, and Prowlers. Those were the options.
So you walked in that door as an ensign and saw all those options on the board. What kind of attracted your attention? Where did you want to end up?
It's funny. I think I was in VT10, and occasionally you'd have operational squadrons come down to kind of show off their aircraft. And one time they brought down a Hawkeye. I'd never seen one before. I didn't know anything about aviation and the specifics. My only goal was to eventually get close to Boston. So I said, you know what? I guess I could do this E-2 Hawkeye thing, which is at least on the East Coast, or I could go to F-14. So that ended up being the ones I asked for. In any case, the Hawkeye det came down one bird, and I remember watching it take off and pretty high angle, and I was like, wow, that looks pretty cool. That's a weird-looking aircraft. I want to know about what these guys do. So I put in my preferences. Top was actually F-14s. I didn't get that. Only one guy in our class got it, and then like 2 or 3 of us got E-2 Hawkeyes, probably based on the requirements to fill billets. So I got Hawkeyes. I'm like, okay, that's good. I'm going to Norfolk for the FRS. And that's good. So I was happy. I remember my buddy, though, he was unhappy. He wanted to go become a Tomcat Rio, and he was all pissed off. And I said, hey, this is going to be fun. He ended up becoming my best friend, and we served together several times throughout the years.
Well, and even those, like you talked about, those initial touch points in flight school, you will see these folks again. It's a very small Navy, a very small community.
You see them all.
Yeah.
Yep.
The good and the bad.
Right.
But rolling the clock back, you talked about VT10. So was it T-34 Charlies at the time?
Yeah, it was T-34 Charlies. I don't remember too much. I was just trying to survive, and I didn't want to throw up. There was a lot of people talking about throwing up in flight, and I was nervous about it, and I never threw up. In fact, I haven't thrown up since 2001. It's like one of my superpowers. And so it ended up being fine. I was nervous all the time because I wanted to do well, and just ended up working out. I did fine.
So the way it works now for our students that go through VT10, they're either going to go, like you said, if they're strike, they're going to go to VT86, flying the T45, get spooled up, go jets, right? Hornets or Growlers.
Yeah, we flew the T1 for intermediate.
No way.
So it was an Air Force Learjet, essentially, for the navigation stuff. It was a fancy, brand new aircraft. You sit basically in the jump seat and you just do navigation. It was not that hard.
And the squadrons, that used to be the Air Force and Navy trained backseaters together at Pensacola.
Right. Yep.
That's obviously changed now. And so you finish that up. Then do you go to VT4 for the advanced maritime syllabus before?
No, you go right to the FRS. So you went there, you had to learn about the aircraft, fly. Then you would get your wings while you're at the FRS. You had a ceremony there. And then you would go into kind of like what would be the normal FRS. For the Hawkeye in the back end, it was all tactics. So you're getting that all early. Learn how to talk on the radio, learn how to fight major air battles, and you do these battle problems, which I thought were great. And then you graduate from there and go to your fleet squadron.
Since you mentioned it, battle problems, I've not heard that phrase before. Could you kind of describe just broadly what that entails, especially as a student early on?
So you would be involved in a major strike or a self-defense operation or a war at sea. We had different scenarios. I don't remember which was which, and I remember there were 5 battle problems. The 5th battle problem was the Kobayashi Maru. It's like one of those things you can't win. and you end up getting shot down in that thing. But yeah, they're pretty complex. So we had to very early on learn about the different roles of the ships, what they played, how they spoke on the radios, all the different roles of the warfare commander, the CWC construct, which is a big deal. And a lot of people don't learn about that till later in their career. We're doing it as ensigns because on the Hawkeye you have multiple radios. You're talking to the command and control network. You might be talking to the KOC via satellite while talking to your strike group commander and his staff, and you're doing it all at the same time. Now, what's funny is a lot of people who got good at this claimed that they could handle 2 or 3 or 4 radios at the same time. I found that was a lie. Like, I don't think the human brain is capable of listening to 2 radios at the same time. You're going to miss something. So you really got to get people to focus on one radio and divide. So eventually what we ended up doing in the Hawkeye community early on in the 90s was putting a lot of the radio talking in some of the command and control functions to the pilots, because you only have 3 guys in the back. You have 2 pilots in the front, so the co-pilot would do a lot of that tactical stuff. There was resistance in the community about that. Part of it's because it's difficult to fly the Hawkeye as it is. I mean, it is old school configuration, and it still is. There's, future changes on the horizon on that to automate things a little bit, especially in terms of landing on a carrier. So that's being looked at. But in any case, we had to load shed some of those tasks. And you keep in mind, the AWACS, which is the E-3 Sentry, is something like 20 to 26 people on there doing the exact same job as a Hawkeye with only 3 guys in the back. So we got overwhelmed a lot in deployment and stuff. And that happens, right?
Since you mentioned the E3, is there any cross-pollination between those communities, that 20-something plus people versus U3, where you kind of learn from them or they learn from you?
There was a little bit. I've done some guest rides on the E3, and it was weird. Just kind of walking around as they're doing these missions. They have multiple controllers, guiding the fighter aircraft. Some people talking to the command and control network. A lot of them are doing jobs, that we would have one person do the jobs of 3. And like I said, we weren't that great at it. Looking back, we survived, right? But it was just interesting. Plus, they were using everybody's first name regardless of rank or enlisted or officer, which was unusual for us at the time. Nowadays, I look back, I'm like, it's probably the right way to do it. Because you're all part of the same crew, right? You live and die together.
Makes sense, too, just from a logical perspective. In that moment, right, if you have that relationship built already, you can kind of lean on someone a little bit differently.
Right.
Name and rank and all that. The Hawkeye itself, so let's kind of scope out what the airplane is for those that maybe are a little bit unfamiliar. Like you said, 2 pilots in the front, 3 NFOs in the back. That big dome disc, I don't know what is actually the right terminology.
We call it a dome.
The dome.
Radar.
Okay. What's going on inside there? It is a radar array.
I started off in the APS 138. It was really old school, 70s technology, black and white screens, actually green and black, with a round scope. That's all evolved it eventually became the APS 145. So this thing is spinning at a certain rate. It's intended to go super long range. The whole goal is to find surface targets and air targets before anybody else does, and then hand it off to either the helicopters or the fighter aircraft to shoot them down. Back in those days, to a degree nowadays, is the fighter radars weren't very long range. Although the Tomcat had a pretty good long range radar with the AUG-9, so we were queuing for them. So we would kind of recommend the initial targeting scenario. You fighters go, to the north, you guys go to the south, and then they would pick it up. They would ask for a declaration to confirm that they had the right target, and we would read back the coordinates. And so if we all agreed, that was the target. And how we spoke on the radio determined whether or not you could kill it. So if we called it hostile, it would die. The terminology has changed over time. Back in the day, you could call it a bandit and you could kill it, right? That was like Desert Storm time frame, 1991. Or if it's a bogey, you had to now get a visual ID. So we would say these things, and sort of a directive to the fighters to do that. Unless their onboard systems could determine the positive hostile ID, and then they can employ. Or if the enemy shot at them, okay, that's good enough for me. Take them out. What's interesting, you go back to 1991, Desert Storm. I got to review a lot of the footage. There was a lot of Air Force air-to-air kills. Like, this is the big thing in the Hawkeye and the fighter community, was air-to-air kills. Going toe-to-toe with another person who's trying to kill you. So the Hawkeye gives an advantage to the fighters because we can detect them before they can detect us, and then we provide initial direction. We put them in the right path, and then they can take out those targets. There was one example in Desert Storm where F-18s were heading to a target. I can't remember the airfield. I remember teaching this in the class when I was an instructor at Top Gun back in the day, and they had switched to air-to-ground mode. They had no intent of doing any air-to-air attacks with these F-18s. At the time, they had the AIM-7 missile and the AIM-9. Didn't have the AIM-120 yet. There was a Hawkeye that was just kind of not the primary control, just listening to the scene. There was a AWACS controlling, and he had multiple F-15s, F-16s under his control, and he was calling out multiple bogeys at different locations. Got a bogey here, bandit here. So the Iraqis were airborne. And at that time, the F-18s didn't have a bullseye capability. capability. So how the AWACS was describing the location didn't translate to anything in the cockpit. Fortunately, there was a Hawkeye Airborne that on the back radio to those fighters said, hey, you got a bandit on your nose 10 miles. And I'm reviewing the tapes. You could see them bring the tapes back up to air-to-air mode and then employ on these MiG-21s right off their nose. And they took out 2 right there. And then the F-18s went ahead, attacked the airfield, and then went home. That was the first time an F-18 had done anything like that. And it also proved the strike fighter capability, ability to do the fighter roll and the strike roll and go home to a carrier in the Red Sea. So pretty cool.
That tape review, that's got to be incredibly critical because, I mean, how many of these engagements actually exist outside of training? Probably at the time somewhat limited, so you get to relive everything that controller. So that's got to be great.
Yeah, from a Navy perspective, we don't get that many opportunities. There was some stuff that happened in Libya where we shot down some MiGs. Then you had 91 with the 2 MiG-21s. I was the XO of the USS George H.W. Bush in 2017 when one of our fighters took out an Su-22 over Syria. The Hawkeye was involved in that as well, providing that initial situational awareness SA. And then until then, this most recent deployment when our F-18s were shooting down multiple drones. Now, what's interesting about that, this was happening in the Red Sea here in 2024. There was some question about whether these were truly air-to-air kills, right? Because you think about it, the drone's not going to attack you. But each of these drones had a warhead inside them. They were pretty large drones. These are not quadcopters. These things are beasts, with only one point, which is to put a hole in the side of a ship and kill mariners or sailors. And they had proven they had done that with mariners and killed some of them. So those things had to go down. And our guys did a great job at taking care of those.
They did. And I know the word I have to mention it because a friend told me to, unprecedented, right? But this level of engagement was that, I'm jumping way ahead of myself, and we'll make sure
we'll get back to that.
Yeah, but I mean, like, truly, was that something, was it unprecedented, really? Or was it a skill set that you all were able to evolve to and be ready to execute? Because naval aviation, that great flexibility that's all kind of baked in from day one. We're just, it's
part of our
threat.
culture. It was a little weird. You know, they're a different profile. They're flying slower than you would expect a fighter aircraft, different size, different radar cross-section, different IR signature, all these things kind of coming into play. But, I mean, we have a culture of adaptation. We figure it out. It's usually done at the JO level. Say, hey, this is what we can do. We also get a lot of help from off-site through, some of these warfighting organizations that support us, pumping us with information, having us tweak software. All of that happened. It was amazing, kind of the learning curve and how quickly it happened, so that we could get F-18s involved, actually in one case an EA-18G, shooting down these drones.
I don't think I'd actually heard that story before. So a Growler, I'm guessing, would AIM-120 most likely?
AIM-120.
Okay,
yep.
I'm sure that crew has a great story to tell. That's incredible.
Oh, yeah. They didn't stop talking about it for weeks. So.
I got a couple of good Growler friends, so that's a softball for them.
Yep, easy one.
Hey, but I mean, again, like, is that it, when the airplane was purchased, I'm sure it was envisioned that, we'll throw a couple AIM-120s on it in that maybe extremis position. Yeah, they have incredible radar, but it's not their mission set to take out air-to-air threats.
No.
But, man, you can do it, and it sounds like they did it well.
And we also did it with F-18s in a tanker role, which we hadn't done before either. So our tankers sometimes got involved and took out drones. I mean, we just had to saturate the sky with as many radars and missiles as possible. There was concerns about, weapons conservation and using too many standard missiles from the destroyers and cruisers. So bringing in some of these lesser expensive missiles made more sense in the Red Sea.
I have heard so much, good Lord, it's BS if I'm being honest, but focus on, why didn't they shoot it down with a gun? A bullet is cheaper. I feel like there's all these factors that people that hide behind a keyboard don't understand. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Right,
I mean, is anyone sitting up there like, I pulled the trigger, there goes the missile, I see the dollar signs fly, or is it what's the most appropriate weapon system to take out this target?
All I can say is this. The commanding officer of a naval vessel has to do what it takes to save that ship. If you're going to toy around with something else and hope for the best, that's not how we roll. I mean, we're going to use our best weapon to save the ship and save sailors. If you want to compare cost, what's the cost of losing 30 sailors? And we can go back to, USS Stark in 1987 when it took an Exocet missile. What's the cost of that? But I do understand the concerns. And even so, we were conscious of that, and we tried our very best to not overdo it so that we could still have missiles for the future, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And again, that's the beauty of a naval warship like this. We think ahead. We think of, hey, maybe we can provide those via a RAS or a helicopter vert rep. It's not like you just take one set of these weapons out to sea. You can get more of them. That's the beauty of the way the Navy operates. We're not tied to the pier. We're not tied to a logistics system. It's a different logistics system, but wind the clock
Early
all the
days.
way back.
Yeah.
But we're getting to the good stuff, so I appreciate that. Kind of scoping out the Hawkeye, the E-2D, so the new variant out there, got the probe, right? So you can get a little bit of gas from, I'm guessing, probably a Hornet or some other asset airborne. But the E-2C, you're limited to what you took off with. Pretty fair statement?
Average flight. I mean, you could do maybe 5.5 to 6 hours, triple cycle in an E-2C Hawkeye, and you're pushing limits there.
That's got to be a long time in that airplane.
Yeah, you don't want to do that normally. We did it in 2014 when I was the CO of VAW 124, the Bay Races. We were supporting Afghanistan missions, so we'd fly over Pakistan into southern Afghanistan, try to help out where we could. Because a lot of times, like in those particular situations, there's nothing air-to-air to go for, right? So the radar doesn't provide you a hell of a lot. So the Hawkeye community very quickly transitioned to what we'd call, at the time, ABC2. I think they're calling it something like that now. So Airborne Battlefield Command and Control. So we'll talk to the troops on the ground. We'll figure out what targets they need to have service and then relay those targets to the right Hornet. That Hornet might be already on station or coming soon. We're there, we can pass those coordinates and we can kind of speed up the process so we can be more lethal.
Chowdah, is there a story from that mission set, like you said, talking to the guy on the ground that maybe sticks out or that you remember for any specific reason?
There was one time in Afghanistan where there was a cloudy memory here, but it was a remotely operated machine gun that was put on like a hill or something. It was identified by whoever was on the ground, and it was a fairly quick handoff to one of the F-18s, and we were just involved in passing the coordinates, I think. And so that was taken out pretty quickly. But when we were there in 2014, it was starting to die down. As that was going on in, I think it was, I'm not sure what month, it might have been June, ISIS invaded northern Iraq and Syria and took over a large swath of land. And we were able to pivot the aircraft carrier in 24 hours back into the Persian Gulf and fly missions the next day. I was actually on that first mission, flying back in the Hawkeye. There was no airspace requirements because all this stuff had gone away since 2011 at that time. Since we were out of Iraq, at least from an air perspective, we still had people on the ground. The air traffic controllers are like, what are you doing here? We're like, we're here to help. So there was a lot of awkwardness there. We didn't know where to station, so we stationed wherever the hell we wanted to, close to Baghdad, and try to figure out the situation. So it was a lot of ISR at that time at the beginning. I left the command before they started doing major strikes. Those strikes went on for a few years and sort of culminated in 2017 when I was back again at this point as the XO of the same ship. It was the George H.W. Bush, and get to see it play out where the air wing had a palpable effect on Mosul. They were supporting that fight, as well as the Air Force. There's probably a lot of special forces on the ground, but essentially liberated that city. And it was kind of cool to say that the Navy was involved in liberating a city. You don't get to make those claims that often, right?
But again, like you mentioned, the flexibility of air power. We don't need a land base to operate from. We don't need a stage tanker somewhere. The carrier air wing brings it all. Is it as good as some of the other assets? Maybe yes, maybe no, but guess what? That Swiss Army knife is what the president needs.
People always say, and you probably heard this before, when there's a crisis, the president always asks, where are the carriers, right? Why is that important? Because a lot of times, and we saw this in the Red Sea, where it's difficult to get rights to certain airports so that our Air Force brothers and sisters can do their thing. It's pretty sparse and remote in the Red Sea, so we were pretty much the only show in town as a carrier strike group for several months.
What's that feeling? Is it a good feeling? Is it a bad feeling? Somewhere in the middle? Will you say you're literally the only asset they have available?
Well, I have to be fair here. The Air Force had their own drones, which were super helpful, and I respect the hell out of what those guys do, so that we were integrated with them. We eventually started getting Air Force tanking so that we could sort of extend our range and get away from the threat. But in any case, nowadays, we're always operating in a weapons engagement zone. We just have to learn to live with it and just get good. And so we've been training to this for years. This is not like a new thing for us. That's the thing about the Red Sea in 2024. I mean, we didn't train to that specific scenario, but we trained our butts off through workups for all kinds of scenarios and had to pass certain tests when you go through CAPT 2X, the certifying event for 6 weeks. So we were prepared for something like that. The sailors performed admirably. I was just super impressed with what I saw.
I think we've seen and heard so many examples, and we're going to get hopefully to your social media presence. I want to ask some questions about that later.
Yeah.
But how did they get to that level of performance? Because it's never a light switch, right? You have to. I always jokingly say that in many cases leadership is a little bit of a dimmer. Instead, you got to bring it up, you got to train, and then evaluate that feedback cycle, and then you get good at it. But this ship, this cruise, might have been their first experience in the Navy ever.
Yeah.
And they, again, like you said, performed admirably at that level. How did you see that kind of mature in workups and then actually going out on this most recent deployment in 2024?
Well, and this should happen at all levels. You do a major evolution, you debrief it. You figure out what you did wrong. You prioritize the people, or you recognize the people who are willing to tell everyone in front of them that they made a mistake. And you have to say that's a good thing, right? Let's talk about the mistakes. We can make mistakes during workups. So we did a lot of that, even at the warfare command or major command level. Major debriefs. So we follow the PBED process, planning, brief, execution, debrief, and it should roll right back into the planning for the next event. If we're good at that cycle, man, there's nothing we can't do with the kind of expertise we have at all ranks on the ship. And then repetition matters too. So for our flight deck personnel, getting used to in workups, flying 6 days a week out of 7, 12 hours a day, more than 100 sorties per day, and then be able to execute the efficiency of launching one and recovering, at the right time, so we can minimize the amount of time we're launching and recovering, so the ship can now maneuver and wait for the next cycle and do this over and over and over for weeks on end. And they get really good at it.
This is definitely an odd perspective, but I guess I'll just ask it. Are you, as an O6, the commander of a nuclear aircraft carrier, are you afraid to fail?
I don't even know what that means. I think we all have
You
fear,
can answer the question
right?
however you like. Yeah, of course.
I mean, it's fear of embarrassment that you train your butts off, and everyone's working so hard, and it just one little technicality can ruin everything. And you have to kind of fight the urge to like blame everybody. How I look at it is mistakes are authorized, and we can have a failure, and then we focus on what we did well. And I'm still recognizing people. If we had a fire on the ship, for example, and it damaged a lot of equipment, we're going to do some serious investigation and figure out what happened, and people could be held accountable. But the people who fought the fire and how they performed, they're going to get medals, man. They're saving the ship. So you turn a negative into a positive. And then behind closed doors, when you debrief and you figure out who needs to be held accountable, and you try to build them back up. It's not the end of the world, necessarily.
Well,
I guess it could be.
No, but I understand the point. That's a great example and a great way to kind of suss out the little differences there. The reason I ask it, sir, I know too many folks that are afraid to fail. And what I mean by that is they don't want the negative feedback. They don't want to look dumb. And it's like, hey, man, actually, you know what? When I fail openly, publicly, and honestly, I get to learn from it. I get to find out what I did wrong. I won't ever make that mistake again because, you know, how I remember it. And I get to move on from there. But also, it takes a lot of... And maybe, and this is, we'll pivot to Top Gun here. Is that debrief culture, was that where it was cemented for you, or was it earlier in the process of your career, or later, or where did that come from?
One of the cultures in Top Gun that eventually spread to everybody was that willingness to bare your soul and say where you're screwed up. The goal is, like, you should name all your mistakes in that particular flight so that the instructor doesn't have to say anything. You're making it easier for them. Like, okay, good. This guy knows how to train himself. So that's what we try to get to. That culture has spread to the Hawkeye community, I'm sure the helicopter community and others, even the surface warfare community, because I get to work with those guys all the time. You know, when we're doing a major evolution on the bridge, we're going to have a debrief, and I only allow people to talk about the things that they messed up or mistakes that they made. So when we go around, I got nothing to say. You guys got it all. Now, there's another theory that says, well, we still have to reinforce the good. Well, that's the job of the leader at the end. Hey, I realize we made a lot of mistakes today, but you guys did really good in X, Y, and Z. You got to do that.
No, but I love that strategy rather than me saying, because you'll hear, hey, give me a good, give me an other. No, I don't want your good. I want your other. Then I will tell you what the good is.
Yeah.
Man, it's
more efficient.
Yeah,
Instead of the self-licking ice cream cone when you're like, yeah, I thought I did pretty good on the comms today. No. Tell me what you didn't do well on the comms so that we can get better next time. And then when we do the next brief, we bring that up. We have to do better in comms. We can't say this or that.
Well, since you mentioned it, and that is something that, again, as an instructor, a Top Gun guy, and we'll get to Top Gun here again in a second, but how do you get folks better at it? Because like you said, there's 3 radios going off at the same time. There's a lot going on in the back of that airplane. At a certain point, it almost is second nature.
If we're talking about the Hawkeye specifically, repetition. You got to do the events. The simulators that we have are awesome. You know, you have these guys that retired military in the background playing the role of everybody else, and they will deliberately saturate you and try to cause you to make mistakes. It's a really impressive way they do it. You know, and I've done a little bit of Hornet time. Usually it's one instructor back there, and I've only done it for, like, you know, emergency procedures and stuff like that. But when you have like a team of, you know, 6 people behind you running the sim, and they're just clobbering the radios, and they will deliberately talk at the same time on different radios. So you'll have to say, hey, stand by on this one, answer one question, get back to the other one, delegate a task to somebody next to you. Hey, can you take this radio for me? I can't handle it. You know, just keep making things happen. And then you're writing stuff down because your brain cannot handle all that information at once. So you have like a constant record of things that are happening so you can keep track of things.
You're smiling. Is it fun? Is it actually an enjoyable experience?
Dude,
it sounds like it could be terrifying.
No, it's amazing. If it's a good flight, you come back after 5 hours and it felt like 1 hour, right? It feels good. I can't handle tedium and just sitting there. I will fall asleep probably. I need to be engaged. And, you know, for those who are thinking about the Hawkeye, like, you want to be engaged? You want to work your butt off and exercise your brain? That's the place to be, especially for NFOs.
It's funny you mentioned that because I had, and if I'm just being totally honest, right, a lot of the students going through 10 at the time I was an instructor had it in their heart that they wanted to be a P8.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know why. My guess would be probably the lifestyle, the Liberty ports, all these things, right? And I get that, and I can understand that.
I get it.
And there was legitimately a Hawkeye draft. They would go to 4. Hey, I worked hard at VT10. I'm going to get P8s in Jacksonville, let's say. And then all of a sudden they were not where they thought they would be. And it was really cool because 6 months after that, one of those students actually came back. That thing you described, sir, they brought an airplane back to do a fleet fly and a show and tell for the students at 10. And this person that I know did not leave that way. Maybe they were just putting on a show, but I actually don't think she was. She was like, no, I actually love it. And it made me feel gratified to know that nothing is ever final in life. You're going to find your way to where you need to go.
Yeah,
but she definitely did. Yeah, and she loved it in the Hawkeye specifically because she realized how much more fun it was.
It is. And part of it's maybe we don't have enough instructors down there. I don't know how many NFO instructors you have down there.
10, one, and it's either the CO or the XO that alternate. That's
right,
it.
right.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Obviously, there's going to be tons VT4. But.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of being challenged. Some of us, we want the easy life. I get it. Like, we've all worked hard. But, what keeps me motivated, and I think it works for other people too, is accepting jobs that are challenging. And this goes to people who think about getting out because they want to fly for the airlines. I'm like, that's great. But is that the challenge that you've always dreamed of having? I don't know. I think a lot of people are afraid of major command and some of the politics, and then there's a little bit of that, don't get me wrong, but it's super challenging, and the amount of influence you can have on people is cosmic in the fact that the bigger Navy is listening to you more so than ever. So if you have a bone to pick as a major commander, someone's going to listen, and something might change.
You've got to try. That is the obligation. Yeah, when you raise your right hand as a naval officer, right? I jokingly I shouldn't even say jokingly, I genuinely believe, I rent these, I don't own these.
Yep.
And by the way, they're a shield and a sword to protect those that work, not for, but with me.
Your rank.
Not exactly. Yeah, it's not something, look how impressive I am. It genuinely is not. No. It's your responsibility to take care of others. And yeah, even as a JO, as an 03 and 04, you have a lot more power than you might otherwise realize.
Right. I'll tell you, I was not a very good JO, or even as an 04, as a leader of sailors. I think my problem is I couldn't find a way to emotionally connect with people. And I think this is important in leadership. There must be an emotional connection where they feel valued, where you're actually loving them. And this is part of my command philosophy. We can go into great detail on this, but you have to love and value people. And I just couldn't find a way to make that connection. Part of it was, when we're junior, we're so focused on the tactical side, making sure we get that right. That's how we're measured. And then you just don't have enough conversations with your maintainers. Like, what am I going to talk about, right? Well, I eventually broke that. And now I'll talk to people about anything, even if I'm being weird and goofy, and it causes people to smile. And then that causes me to have an emotional investment, and it goes back at me. We need more leadership like that, I think. I'm only saying this because I've done it the wrong way for so long, and I think it works better this way.
Was there a crystallizing event or something that just made you say, hey, I got to do something different than what I've been doing? Was there any big moment, or you just kind of came to that realization slowly?
I was a late bloomer, and it didn't happen until I was the XO of a squadron. When I realized I have to get over myself, I have to be the mature person. I should not be afraid to give a speech. I need to practice my speeches. And I learned instantly, if I'm going to give an off-the-cuff speech, I'm going to at least need to know 3 things I have to talk about. If it's 4 things, I'm going to forget probably 2 of those and be down to 2. So 3 was as much as my brain could handle. I'd have something to say, and I'd practice it in the car. That was the defining moment where I realized I have to be an adult. And so now, since then, it's been my passion in life to just get better at that and recognize my mistakes and try to be a better leader. And I'm putting it in writing. I'm trying to write this down so I don't forget some of these things, because sometimes we deviate from our own principles. And you have to think about it, saying, that's not me. I need to smile more. Well, I didn't feel good today, so I'm going to fake smile if I have to, because I become instantly unapproachable when I have that scowl on my face.
And you're
I can't do that.
And when you set the tone for the whole ship in this specific case, the squadron, whatever it is, if the boss isn't happy, I'm not going to roll in there with a big smile on my face because he might bark at me. So you literally set the tone.
It makes the ready room awful. People stop showing up. They don't want to be there and hang out. That should be the hangout for the JOs. I mean, they should have fun there. So that's an indicator as a leader. If things aren't working out and you're unapproachable and you don't know that because maybe you haven't had a command climate survey, which will tell you if you're approachable or not, then, if nobody's in your ready room, you got to start changing how you do business.
I have heard people say phrases like, maybe not directly, maybe it's more covertly than overtly, about being afraid of a semio survey or a complaint or this. Dude, send it. If I'm doing something that bad, truly, I need to be held accountable, number one. But number two, if I don't know, if I can't ever shift, and how is everything ever going to change?
Well, I'll tell you, where you won't go wrong is if you deliberately try to love and value people and give them mission and purpose, and you try to build up morale, you're going to be okay on a command climate survey. This is what people want and need, and this is the stuff that inspires people to do things correctly when nobody's looking. I mean, that's really the essence of leadership. It's how do I get people to do something they might not otherwise do without me micromanaging and having driving them to the process. There's a lot of delegation in the military. We have to trust people. I get that, but some people still got their claws in there. They want to micromanage it. And some of it's okay. Sometimes you have to micromanage when it's a new task and you have to get it right the first time and that person hasn't done it before, maybe you got to do it together, something like that. But I can go on and on about this all day.
And I wish you would, because I think it's a practice skill. You don't know it, but you're actually describing a situation in my life currently, and it's like, yeah, man, you kind of have to step back and let people lead, and it is dangerous and frustrating, and at times you're like, dude, like the answer is right here, and I'm telling you the answer.
Yeah.
But they have to find their way to it, and you have to support them. My attitude in my very limited experience is like, hey, man, what do you need from me? Like, no, is a an E4, do I work for an E4? No. Actually, yes. The answer is yes, I do. Yeah. I don't know the intricacies of their job, but I'm there to support them so they can do it, and I kind of keep the other BS away so they can focus on being great at that.
That is the special characteristic of the U.S. military, and how much power we delegate down to the junior level and have to trust them to do the right thing. For instance, I have 19, 20-year-olds that are moving rods at a nuclear reactor. On what planet would you allow people that young to work on such a big deal, right? And we do. It's amazing. It's something we should be proud of. But like you said, it takes practice.
It does. And that trust is built through that practice. I'm guessing, like we talk about workups, getting ready for deployment. Yep. You can't skip one and go right to the other. That has to be earned. And from both perspectives, right? They have to earn trust in you, but yeah, it works both ways. Right. We've wandered way far from the Hawkeye. So we're going to jump back to Top Gun. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Yep. You were either one of the first or the first Hawkeye NFO to go through Top Gun.
We had Hawkeye students for many years. I was the first to be an instructor.
An instructor, okay.
And there's been several since then. So technically, I'm the godfather of the instructor.
Hawkeye instructors. We can go with that. I like that. Why you? Why were you chosen for that role?
A lot was changing around that time, where I think the fighter guys started to see the value of making the Hawkeye more professional and bringing them more into the training. We all kind of knew that, but I felt like there was a separation between the communities that shouldn't have existed. We relied on each other airborne implicitly, explicitly too. And I think Top Gun just got wise and said, okay, let's do this. At the time, they also had OS, chiefs and senior chiefs. They had been in the program for a while. They had Marine officers who were ground officers as well that did the TPS radars. They figured it's time to bring in a Hawkeye. So they basically had to take a billet from the E-2, what we called CAWS, Carrier Airborne Early Warning Weapons School, which is on the other side of the building. Take a billet from them, put it in Top Gun. So I was the guy. It was a little weird at first. I still maintained my quals and became a Weapons and Tactics Instructor via the Hawkeye community for the guys on the other side of the building, and they were also my best friends. So it was cool. The intent was to bring those two organizations together, CAWS and Top Gun, and I think that's been a success for many years. They've been doing it. We fly together, we die together, we party together. That's the way it should be.
I like the order on that too. But
the order is a little off, but
for legal reasons, it can be whatever it needs to be.
Yeah.
No. And you mentioned earlier on that, and I know from your resume, obviously, not all the flight time is in the Hawkeye. You got a couple flights with, was it Super Hornets, F-14s, when you were a Top Gun guy? And the reason I'm asking the question, number one, what were those platforms? But number two, what did you learn from those flights? What value did you bring back from that?
So they didn't have Hawkeyes at Fallon, Nevada, where I was, and I still had to maintain my hours, so I flew in the F-18B, and sometimes the F-18D when a Marine squadron would come, and then eventually the F-18F if we had a few of those. They were just starting to come out, the Super Hornet at the time. I didn't know what the hell was going on in the back. I tried my best. What I loved about it is the flights were typically 1.0 or 1.5. I'm like, this is amazing. This thing happens so quick. And usually by the 1.5 mark, I start to get a little queasy. That was fun, and I didn't get very good at it. I could play with the radar a little bit, work the IFF. I eventually started building some pretty good SA from the back seat, seeing what was going on. And then when there was dogfighting, I could sometimes find I had my glasses on, but I could find the bandit.
Do you think it made you better as a controller in the Hawkeye when you continued?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
How so?
Because when we communicate a threat, we have a very specific comm format that we use. We have to kind of try to understand what's going on in the mind of the fighter. You have to kind of understand when they can't see it or when they can see it. Are we given the right SA? Did they miss a piece to it? If you're sitting in the fighter cockpit, you get to see that perspective. Like, oh, now I know why we say this call at this time. I can't give the specifics because, and by the way, a lot of those calls have changed over the years, and I've been truly out of the cockpit full-time since 2014 when I was the CO of a squad, so 10 years. But yeah, that was the theory behind it.
Again, we're not going to talk about the specific wording, but I think even just how you make a radio call. As dumb as this sounds, the tone, the tenor, the speed, or the slowness, there's actually an art form in it.
Yeah.
Like you talked about, you literally have to hear it a bunch, see it a bunch, do it a bunch yourself. But what has influenced your style in terms of maybe lessons learned from other folks or things you've observed?
In terms of comms, when we're doing air-to-air communications, I approached it like you would learning a foreign language. I know the words are in English, but the order in which we use them is very specific syntax and format. And the only way you're going to learn a language is you got to say the words a lot, at least for me, because I've learned French in the past. I'm trying to learn Spanish on Duolingo right now and struggling through that. But if I say the phrases over and over, I am more likely to say them instantly. It's almost like the brain can bin things in phrases as well as individual words, but it's better if you have the whole phrase. Back in the day, an example comm would have been Dome, 2 groups, azimuth 25, north group, bullseye 18025, 15,000 hot, hostile, south group, 25,000 flank southeast, bogey spades, something like that. I can still say it because it's still stuck in my mind as like clumps of phrases. I don't know if that makes any sense, but for language immersion, that helps. When I'm speaking to people in foreign languages, or at least trying to, I can convince them early on that I can speak it well when I really can't, because I've just memorized canned phrases. I could say like, j'ai pris la langue de français depuis 20 ans. Il y a longtemps depuis que j'ai pris la langue à l'école. Something like that, right? So those are phrases back in the day. I'm not very good at French anymore, but I could say them fast. And they're like, whoa, you could speak really well. I'm like, that's about it, my friend. When you ask me a question, it's going to come out really slow, word by word.
Well, and the reason I mentioned it, that was one of my fascinations at VT10 was, it's a T6, it's a fire-breathing Texan, right? Like, there's a lot going on for someone that's only ever maybe been in a Cessna or a commercial airliner before that. And so I had this deep fascination with how do I help them, our students get, our student naval flight officers get better. And as dumb as it sounds, and I will publicly admit it for the first time, the movie Apollo 11, there's a very specific sequence when they're landing on the moon. I would play that for a student to debrief and pause it at certain times and say, hey, do you notice how at this moment something was going on that actually wasn't important, and a controller said, hey, stop, let's task shed that. And all we need to give them is fuel call-outs, because everything else we have is extraneous. They're either going to land or abort. That's all they have. But like breaking it down so they could observe that and listen to it. I don't know if it worked. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. I played the movie a bunch, right? But
listening's important.
Trying to get in someone's brain to, what do they say, understand the intelligence behind the mistake, because we've all made these mistakes and we've all improved from them.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I'm going to watch Apollo 13 and see what you're talking about. It's been a while.
And Apollo 11, and the beauty of it. Sorry, no, it's all documentary footage from the landing on the moon, and it's remastered and it looks beautiful. But even just those comms flows, listening, these are folks that are landing on a foreign planet. But I don't know, when you know, when you hear that, you're like, oh yeah, these dudes knew what was going on, and of course they did. So it was my little debrief style. But Operation Southern Watch, and that was pretty early on. Was that a formative experience, actually knowing you're controlling aircraft with live Hornets on them, and there's bad guys below in the country of Iraq?
It was a weird operation, and it lasted for years. It was a tit-for-tat, times where, the Iraqis would make claims that they scared us away because we would fly in for a cycle and then leave. They scared us, right? They would launch. There were a few times where there was overlapping, where they launched while we were there. There were a few attempts at shoot-downs, but there was also threats from the ground. We did another operation called Operation Desert Fox, and that was, I think it was end of 1998. It was just in and around Operation Southern Watch, but more concentrated strikes, basically to get rid of Saddam Hussein's weapons programs, which is interesting because this was, a few years before Gulf War II in 2003. And so we were kind of hitting a lot of those targets to begin with years prior. Desert Fox was an example of that. That was like the most formative combat experience of my life because, well, aside from what happened this year, many years later, but I was on the first Hawkeye to launch for the first Desert Fox mission. It was like, 1 a.m. We were launching. We were going to do it all at night. It was going to continue on for 4 days straight. I was the junior guy, so I was a lieutenant junior grade, sitting in the RO seat, radar operator, and I was going to be the controller. And I had the skipper and the mission commander seat. He was also an NFO. We launched, and I guess at the same time, I probably knew this at the time, but I since forgot, but they launched dozens and dozens of Tomahawk missiles all at the same time. You can kind of see them off the side because we can only see out the right side, and you could see them launching. I was like, that's interesting. And I remember the pilot saying, hey, what altitude do these things fly? And we looked at our altitude, and we had to climb immediately. But, later on in life, I realized that had all been deconflicted. We just didn't know at the time. And then to track all those going in, doing their targets while our aircraft were going into strike, sort of a shock and awe type thing. But I was pretty young. I'm like, I can't believe this is happening. My mouth was dry. I was nervous. There were no real threats. I was just saying picture clean multiple times. There was some AAA fire, if I recall, but it didn't look like it was targeting anybody. And some was fairly close to us. I'm like, maybe they're targeting us. I don't know. We drove away from it, but it was just interesting.
In 2024, you flew the Hawkeye off this ship. Obviously, it's part of the operations we're talking about here. With all that experience, all those years of time, is there anything you could tell Lieutenant Junior Grade Hill from that mission you were just describing? Any advice that you wish you'd been given by a mentor or a friend, or again, just with the benefit of all that experience?
There's probably nothing. Even when I was young, I enjoyed those flights. Right? I enjoyed flying, especially if it was a tactical mission. And I got to do that in the Red Sea a little bit with VAW 123. Those guys were awesome, the screw tops. So they let me fly on Fridays usually. I could could have flown in the Hornet, but at the same time, every mission was tactical in the Red Sea, and I'm not going to be value added in the backseat necessarily. So, as the deployment moved on, we're in the Red Sea for now like 6.5 months. Everyone was pretty tired. They'd be like, sir, you got it. You talk to the fighters. I'm like, yeah, cool. Maybe we'll get a drone or something. I don't know. And this was a E-2C Hawkeye 2000. It was much more of an upgrade than what I had dealt with in the past, even in my command tour. So it had a lot of intel feeds coming in. I had great SA. I love this thing. We had the tactical laptop going. That's all chat rooms talking to the command and control network. A lot of it's now on chat, not necessarily comm, which is an issue, I think. You still have to supplement with comm. But in any case, we would get these specific targets from various offsite sources, and I would read the coordinates to the fighters as quickly and as efficiently as possible. By the way, the font was like type 3 font, so I'm picking up my reading glasses. This is why old men don't fly anymore, because our eyesight's no good. I mean, it was bad to begin with, right? So now I have bifocals here. But in any case, I'm trying to read this thing, and a guy backing me up to make sure I didn't screw up the words. They were just being nice, like, hey, sir, you can give these targets. And then, trying to get our drones to kind of look at it so we can see the battle damage assessment, and that whole cycle was just awesome. And then I'd come back to the ship and see the results.
And there's got to be no other country in the world that does it this way or does it this well, if I had to guess.
I can't imagine. Nobody has aircraft carriers like we do. I know other countries have them. They're great. They're small.
Yeah, this is a superpower thing. Like, this is only something that we really have.
Yeah, I mean, if we're pumping out 100 plus sorties per day for 12 hours, there's nothing else like it. In terms of combat power, you think about it, if we're going to do a combat operation, maybe we're going to have 2 carriers, maybe 4, maybe more than that, right? And you can imagine that round-the-clock capability of striking power anywhere we want on 70% of the planet. That's impressive. And there's a lot of people say, hey, they're very expensive. I get that. I'm not here to talk about it. I'm not in that world, but we try to be as judicious as possible in terms of expense. We try our best. Having said that, this is a capability that is unlike any other, and it's still super relevant despite anything you hear. We proved in the Red Sea how relevant an aircraft carrier can be in terms of saving other people's lives.
You mentioned, despite what I might or might not have heard, what are some of those myths that you've heard that you can kind of bat aside with experience and the knowledge that you haven't been in this role?
One myth is like the aircraft carrier is too vulnerable, right, based on modern threats. I'm like, well, guess what, my friends? This is warfare. Things are evolving. We never expected the aircraft carrier to be immune to being attacked. And they've designed the ship with, 60s and 70s specs. These things are built like beasts, designed to take hits and just keep on moving. A ton of redundancy built into the ship. We have 4 catapults. Why 4? Well, in case if we lose a couple, we still can fight. 4 screws on the back of the ship, the ability to go to 30 plus knots. We have 2 reactors. Why 2? Well, it's nice to have 2, but you could accomplish a lot with 2. But if you lost one, you could still fight. So there is no other capability like it, even today. And even the USS Dwight D, 47 years old, still fully capable of doing some of the most challenging missions that the Navy's seen since World War II.
And I think it's a correct statement. One of the great BMCs that's been helping us on San Antonio, she jokingly says, I think it was what Nimitz fought, the Viet Cong. And that ship is still fighting the enemies of America now. Like, that's incredible. Right. It's lasted as long as it has.
I thought they were commissioned in 75, so they might have missed the boat on that one.
It's still a good quote, but I
think
it's
probably... a good quote. We'll keep using it. Yeah, so we were commissioned in 77. This ship has done 20 deployments, and my sources say it has done more time at sea than any other ship that's out there now, even though the Nimitz is older.
Well, and at least on the East Coast, like that, when you think of the ship that's going back out and handling those mission sets, it's this one, it's the Eisenhower.
Right. It's easy to remember 20 because it's a round number of deployments. I'm also the 20th CO, so it works out. Yeah.
I love it. No, it keeps it simple. That's awesome. Yeah. Before we move on, this is a super stupid question, but I just have to ask. Did they ring you off the ship and ring you back on the ship when you take off and land on these missions?
Yes.
No way.
Yeah.
Like,
so departing and then returning.
That is fantastic.
Yeah, we do it for the Admiral when he flies, for CAG when he flies.
That is fantastic. Yeah. Okay, cool. Again, and this is, like I said, the first time I've ever been on a carrier before. To me, all this is new and exciting, and this is the heart of naval aviation. This is what everything is built around, is this strike asset.
No, it is. It's unbelievable. I don't actually know how many aircraft we have. I know it sounds ridiculous because the numbers have been distorted so many times, but the Air Wing brings more than 65, up to 70 aircraft to the mission. That's unprecedented. We're flying more than most countries fly on any given day with civilian aircraft. It's insane.
So there are a couple stats that I'd seen that kind of jumped out to me. 31,000 flight hours, 13,000 traps. The ships in the strike group steamed in excess of 69,000 miles over this deployment. Like, as I understand it, I want to say Ford on her first one, it's like 9-ish thousand hours, and you guys triple that on your deployment. How the heck does that work? There's a reason these numbers are kind of standardized at a point where we're all used to, let's just say X number, and then you guys double or even triple that on this most recent deployment. Why the heck was it so different, and how did the the people and the machinery hold up to that?
So we'll answer the first part. We did not have a port call for the first 7 months. So we planned to fly 6 days a week, 7th day, maintenance day, which is also work day, 12 hours a day for the fly days, not to mention more than 150 alert aircraft launch, which is also insane. So there was a lot of flying off hours too. Difficult on the crew. But, we didn't get a port call until after the 7th month. We got 2 port calls at the end. Average sailor only had about 6 days off the ship in 9 months, which is... It's happened before, but it is still unusual. How did they hold up? I was saying as it was happening, I'd talk to media and say, I can't believe how incredible the morale actually is, given the circumstances. And part of it was because there was a lot of pride in taking part in a mission where there were missiles and drones flying around every day. We're striking back almost every day. And then I would talk about on the 1MC, we even had our reactor sailors getting intel briefs because they asked for them, just to keep that mission and purpose up, which improves morale, which improves success. We all believe in this, and not just me, but talking to CAG and with Carrier Air Wing 3, he agrees mission and purpose is a big deal. We also looked at, from a resiliency perspective, some of the destroyers and how they handled all those shoot downs. They shot multiple missiles. It was insane. This is the third time I said that. But it was unprecedented. And we had contacts with our lead chaplain, would talk to the chaplains in all the ships. So I think for us, at least our strike group, we had a chaplain on every ship, which is a fairly new thing. And those chaplains were saying the crew is pumped. They're high-fiving after these. It was, because they were winning and the ships weren't getting hit, which is a big deal. And they were saving other people's lives. The mission wasn't to save lives. It was to military jargon terms, right? But the implied mission was to save civilian lives, and they were doing that.
And getting to do your job, getting to do that mission has to be,
yes.
So, like you said, rewarding and fulfilling. Is there any risk? You talked about opening the door and letting some of those folks maybe know more than they otherwise might on another ship or on another deployment. Is there any inherent risk in that, or does it even really matter? You're getting that buy-in from them as a result. So, at least in my perspective, that's more than worth whatever minimal risk there might be.
Hey, any amount of sincere, transparent communication is going to be a good thing. There were some things I couldn't say, because we have some people on the ship that don't have the clearances, but I could say whatever CENTCOM said on their X feed. So the next day I could say, guess what we did yesterday? Boom, boom, boom. This ship shot down these missiles, our aircraft shot down this many drones, and we would go on. And just to remind them of the role that they played in that mission.
Again, we talked about first, or maybe things that are, maybe save the term unprecedented for later, but there's a lot of firsts. So I want to kind of go down the list. First, air-to-air engagement of a hostile UAV, and that was VFA 105 that made that one happen. Why is that so special? Why is that so different?
We hadn't seen drones like this in combat in this sense. I know there's been stuff like it with Ukraine, but for the U.S. Navy, we hadn't seen it. So we were coming up with that first list. I remember the day we were doing it, and all the major commanders in the room, and we just spouting off all these firsts, just because they were unusual. Does it really change the character of warfare? Not really. Warfare is warfare. Doesn't matter what it is. The technology changes, but the character doesn't.
We can't talk about them here, but a lot of those details, those very specifics, kind of like you talked about you reviewing those tapes, have those been passed on to the fleet, or were they even, was it in the moment, or is it something that now that y'all are back pier side and the kind of the phase of the ship has changed a little bit that you can kind of share them 1v1? How is that debrief loop continued?
I do a thing called CO's calls, where I bring people into this room that you're in right now, about 10 to 15 sailors in small chunks. Normally you do a CO's call when you take over command. I did that a year and a half ago, and I'm still doing CO's calls. I decided not to do it with 3,000 people on the flight deck. I find that inefficient, and I'm not getting the message across. So you break it up in small chunks over a period of time, and then you just tell the stories. And so every time I talk, I'll tell a different story. It depends on how people react. Do I keep going or not, right? This is just to warm people up, getting them excited about what they did, and then eventually get them to open up and provide me feedback on things that are bothering them with, in terms of quality of life and stuff like that. I think that's a great technique. I learned it on the Arlington during COVID because you could not have more than 10 people to a room. So I did my CO's calls. I did 40 of them, 10 people apiece for 400 sailors on that ship and 2 Marines I think we had at the time. And it took forever. It took about 3 or 4 months, but it was so effective of creating that bond and that emotional investment that we need to have in people to show that you love and value them.
I've noticed, and that's an incredible story, and I love how that was the genesis of that. That's something you still use today.
That's by mistake.
No, but it's not a mistake because it came from a good place and it's had value here, even though it's a much bigger crew. Right. On a CVN than an LPD, but
except I'm not done yet on this.
Still more to go.
I think I have 2,550 sailors have been in this room over the past year and a half.
And think about it. How many other ships will they have had that experience? I'm guessing probably none. I don't want to cast aspersions, but that's so cool that you've given them that direct feedback that they get to know the boss. And I imagine they're probably not that long of interactions. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But any bit of exposure has to be so valuable to them.
There was another example. I had a boss on the Bush when I was the XO, who's now Admiral Bailey, who would do check-ins every single day in the in-port cabin, similar to this room. So new sailors would be waiting out there. We'd bring them in every day. The CMC, XO, and the CO would kind of give them our spiel. We said the same thing over and over for months on end. But I think it was special, and you'd have like groups of 2 or 3. On a carrier, you have anywhere between 60 and 80 new people per month, and the same amount leaving, right? We didn't get to do the departing people, but we tried to capture all the inbound people, which is important. Like, you wanted to do that in the first 72 hours, make them part of the culture, let them know that you care, let them see your faces, so when you're walking down a P-way, they don't grunt at you. They realize, oh, that's the CO. Like, they have to recognize your face. And if I have someone grunt at me, which I've had, they just don't recognize who I am, then that's my fault. Why didn't I see their face at in-dock or something else? So it makes you a better leader.
First off, love that you said grunt. That's fantastic. But second off, I mean, I've had that experience, I'll just say, I'll keep it broad, but recently, where I'll say, and this is not an Air Department sailor, for example, on the ship that I'm on now, and I'll say, hey man, what's going on? Oh, how are you doing? I'm fine. I'm like, no, like, I will literally say, dude, stop bullshitting me. Like, and of course, that generally breaks the ice, because it's like, why is this person telling me that I'm bullshitting them?
Yeah.
Like, no, man, like, seriously, no offense, I can see it in your face, I can see it in your demeanor. Yeah. What is going on? And even then, that doesn't always work, but you gotta try. You gotta try
something, right? Try to break through that wall. Some people don't want to talk, and then sometimes you'll get them to talk, and then they'll talk your ear off. And sometimes you might be saving their life. You know, they could be going through a rough time. And then you create a new emotional investment with a sailor who might not be in your chain of command, but now you're sort of a mentor to him in some way, right? Imagine when we were young, we had people like that for us. I didn't have that many, but there were a few that blew me away, that showed that they cared. And, you know, I wish I remembered their names. I'm such a terrible person, but I do respect what they did. First off,
I mean, I would not say you're a terrible person. But second off, the fact that you learned that lesson and you want to continue to impact others, you mentioned kind of the mental health aspect to it. That is something that I, if I'm being honest, didn't expect. It wasn't something I'd experienced in the fleet before kind of getting to the ship Navy, if I'm being totally honest. But it is honestly the most rewarding part of it, because you feel, maybe right or wrong, but like you're actually involved to a level to help. I don't want to be dramatic and say save someone's life. Maybe you actually are doing exactly that.
Right.
But like,
you can't rely on your mental health providers or medical to do the job for you. And this is something that a lot of small ships have had to figure out on their own. Like, they might have a senior corpsman or something. That's it. So leaders have to be emotionally invested. They have to kind of sense when something's wrong and then do something about it. On carriers, it's a little bit challenging. There's so many people. The ratio of chiefs to enlisted is different. In other words, you have more junior enlisted than you have chiefs, and so they can get overwhelmed. But, you know, when morale fails, we have a resiliency effort. And on a carrier nowadays, and this is fairly new, we're going to have a psychologist, a licensed clinical social worker, a deployed resiliency counselor. We'll have a life boss who can teach classes on whatever, you know, conflict management, anger, stress management, stuff like that. We even had a dog, Captain Demo, who is the furry beast walking around. He's like my best friend. He gained 15 pounds. I feel terrible, but we just loved him. Everybody wanted his affection. We also had Wi-Fi. You need to make sure you get that on your ships.
Can you tell me about that? Because I've heard so much good and bad about Wi-Fi. Really? Yeah, let's talk about Wi-Fi. Yeah. As dumb as that might sound, I have heard people say, I won't give any names, and it's not on my ship for clarity, but I have heard people say, we don't need to have it. That when you're away, you can actually spend more time focused on just the mission, and that they view Wi-Fi as a bad thing. Maybe a softball, but what do you think about that?
You can spend more time on the mission if you have no ability to talk to people back home. Technically, that's correct. That is not right. We are human beings. Our souls are attached to other people on and off the ship. You cannot sever those ties. It just doesn't work. Some of these soul ties, whatever you want to call them, these spiritual connections, these emotional investments, have to be nurtured. You know, I've had young people, very successful, sailors of the quarter, sailors of the year, who talk to their mom or dad every single day. When I heard that at first, I'm like, wait a second, that seems like a little much to me, right? I wasn't doing that. But maybe they're on to something because they're the sailor of the quarter. They have a way to offload problems rapidly with mom or dad or spouse. So having the Wi-Fi enabled that. Does it take away from work? It could. I didn't see any examples of that. I didn't see any OPSEC violations. I saw nothing but benefits. In fact, what I did see is a lot of frustration because so many people would be on the damn thing that it would like basically cease operating. There was not enough bandwidth going through. People asking me questions. When's the Wi-Fi coming back? We tried to go big and try to offer it as many spaces as we could, usually mess decks and a few other areas, to as many people as possible. We found that sometimes we had like 2,000 people connected at once. Sometimes they're connected because the phone's in their pocket and it's just connecting on its own. So that sucks up some bandwidth. But man, game changer in terms of your ability to talk to your external support network. Sometimes when you're having a bad day, you don't want to go to your chain of command. You might be new to the ship and you don't have friendships yet. Who are you going to talk to? You're probably going to call mom. By the way, the moms and dads, they work for us because they're going to say, hey, you're doing fine. We're proud of you. Get back on your feet and continue, which a lot of moms and dads do. So they're doing our job for us. So why would we not want to have Wi-Fi? Now, I get it. There's OPSEC concerns. There's times in combat where you have to turn it off, and there's systems to do that. We did that a few times. We did it several times, actually. But, all in all, I wanted it to be as available as possible. And it also allowed for a little bit of social media interaction, which we could talk about.
And I was perfect setup. Yes, sir. Well, and you had, I would argue, a probably very deliberate and well-crafted, and maybe not. Maybe this is just you that we get to experience through your Instagram posts and LinkedIn and whatever else it might be that's out there in X. But was that a deliberately thought-through strategy? Because honestly, as strange as this might sound, I don't know of another CVN CO out there that is as accessible or as seen. I don't know if that's what you were aiming for, or you just, again, I don't know what the strategy was, but kind of tell us all about it.
There are some that are doing this, which is awesome, and a very similar strategy to what I used. Very simple strategy. Well, initially the strategy was to talk about the way of the warrior sailor command philosophy and use excerpts from like the 26 pages that are in this thing. And I put some pictures on there because you got to put pictures on there, right? And it was pictures of sailors. It wasn't pictures of me showing off or anything. And then the FRG, our family readiness group, saw that I was posting pictures, which was difficult for our public affairs folks, our media, to put pictures because there's a big vetting process, but I didn't have that process. And I got some left and right boundaries from my professional public affairs folks, say, hey, don't post this, post that. But if I could post a sailor getting an award, okay, that's fine. Now, the families found out, and they jumped to my account, and they started asking for more and more. And I couldn't keep up with the demands. There were so many, hundreds, probably 1,000 at least, mostly moms and dads, some spouses, sometimes children of sailors wanted to see their dad. That broke my heart when I saw that. And I, of course, would get their dad up there, right? I'm getting choked up thinking about it. It was just beautiful. But, it started like that. And then I added a little bit of personality in there. I like talking about Taco Tuesday. It's my absolute favorite day of the week. I say this every Tuesday on the 1MC. It's like my thing. Right. So when I give advice to others about their social media, be yourself. Be authentic. You don't have to copy someone else. You don't have to be this program is you. This is your personality. If you make jokes or, drop a swear word, whatever, it's fine. That's you. We can live with that. But that's what the public wants. So it ended up expanding beyond the Navy, which was interesting. Now I have an audience here. What am I going to do with it? So it was like, hey, I'm going to sell the Navy a little bit. Here are some normal people that come from your hometown. I sometimes put the hometowns of the sailors, and they're young, they're 19, 20 years old, and they're doing incredible things. They're driving the ship. We had 19-year-olds driving the ship. You see it on your ship. Some of our youngest people are driving these warships. It's crazy, but we do it. So I don't know if it helped with recruiting at all, but, I talked to a lot of people asking questions about how do I get into the Navy. I just refer them to the website. How do I know? I'm not a recruiter, right? But the CNO has asked for us all to be recruiters in our own way. So this is the best way I could do it.
No, it's a great way to do it. And you're, like you say, you're communicating the mission that otherwise might be hidden behind closed doors. So many people think there was a Hawkeye. I think it was a D model in the Top Gun Maverick movie, the more recent one, right? So maybe that is their only viewpoint on that airplane. In some cases, maybe their only look into the world that they're, like you said, loved ones are in is what you've shared online.
Right. I like Top Gun Maverick. I like the fact that they incorporated the E-2. So
what do you think about the comms? Were the comms accurate?
They were not, but that was okay. That's fine.
Okay.
That was done deliberately.
Sure.
We had some advisors on there. I think some of them.
I do.
And they made the right calls by, they introduced a little bit of the Tomahawk piece. They introduced the Hawkeye and the role that they played. I loved it. And I guess the female controller on there was an actual Hawkeye NFO doing that role. And she did a super job. I had heard that they were going to have an actor do it, but when she was demonstrating it, they said, okay, we're going to use you. And so that was great. So there's a lot of pride there for the Hawkeye community because they're going to be involved in all of these missions. They have to understand every aspect of it. They have to know all the ins and outs and what can go wrong and how they can jump in there and try to fix things. A lot of times on the Hawkeye, you're just, something goes wrong, you're just trying to fix it. A lot of times, it's like a tanker falls out. Well, who's going to fix that? Well, the Hawkeye can do it, right? So they'll manage how much fuel you have left on your jet, and then they can start spreading it out to other people so everyone gets the gas and then go home. But yeah, so Top Gun Maverick, that was a good movie.
It looked really good to me, too. But that might be the only viewpoint someone has. If they don't see that social media aspect, there is for many good reasons why you have to be a little bit protective and maybe a little bit deliberately cagey about what you put out there. But just striking that balance, it's really cool that, number one, you made the choice to do it. And I would argue you did it very well, representing the Navy and naval aviation especially. But I guess I would say, number one, thank you for doing it because it's really cool. Not everyone has that bandwidth, that thought process, that desire, or that risk acceptance. Because there is a little bit of all that in there.
Yeah,
but you made the choice to do it. And so thank you for doing it. Hopefully others will do it in that vein. And you know what? Yeah, we're going to make mistakes, but we learn, we get mistakes.
Better. Yeah. OPSEC's a big deal, right?
Absolutely.
You have to be careful what's in the background, that sort of stuff.
Get water. There's water all around.
There's a lot of water in my pictures. Right?
And for good reason. reason.
Yeah.
Exactly.
A lot of Hornets landing and taking off, and Hawkeyes, and even the CAPT. I had to make sure that we put the C2 on there and what they do for us, because it was always exciting when those guys landed.
Well, and I was going to say, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's obviously a transition, a pivot, right? The CODs are going to be sunset here soon. We're moving to the realm of the Osprey. What was it like? Some of the last deployments that these aircraft are going to be on. What was that relationship with the carrier and then the CODs that support the ship?
Oh man, this goes way back. So they're part of the Air Wing, 100%. They just don't live on the ship all the time. They'll transit with you, across the Atlantic or whatever, or when you move into a new location. We have some of their maintainers. They usually link up with the Hawkeye maintainers because they have similar systems. I mean, the C2 looks like a Hawkeye without the dome. Very different on the inside. It's actually a different body as well if you compare them side to side, because the COD was designed to put people in there. It can do other special missions, but we relied on them quite a bit to get like emergency parts out to us. And actually, our CODs flew twice the amount of hours that they normally did for a deployment because of the long distance of where we were and the hubs where they were operating out of. So they just put in a lot of work to support us. So we're proud of them.
Okay, sir. So again, all over the place. I love it. But while we're thinking about it, right, the tour that I'm on an amphib as the Assistant Air Operations Officer. You were there as a CO. What the heck is that like being a Hawkeye guy, but now you're on an amphib as the CO? Obviously, it's part of the process getting you ready to take command of this ship. Yeah. What was that experience like?
I was a little nervous about it. I didn't really have much exposure to the amphib world. I'd had no experience working with Marines except for like a Marine F-18 squadron and previous deployments. But I went through some training on how this amphib world works. I'll be honest with you, when I got selected to go to an LPD, which you find out while you're in nuclear power school before you become the XO, which is great, XO of a aircraft carrier. I had to look it up. Then I saw one. I'm like, this thing looks pretty cool because it's pretty modern looking. It's sleek. Looks like it's got some stealthy capability. So that's all I knew. And you show up there, and a lot of people are saying to me, hey, you got to watch out. There's going to be a lot of ensigns, a lot of 10 GGs, a lot of first tour. They're a little crazy. I didn't see any of that. The whole ship was just, it was something else. It felt like a family. The ensigns were great because the surface warfare community has done a really good job after we had some accidents in 2017 of really truly training them for these missions, and they were superb. The surface community had done a good job to get circadian friendly watch rotations so people aren't falling asleep at the middle of the night. They're alert at all hours of the night doing their job because the commanding officer has to sleep at some point, right? The amphib job, it's exciting. You're flying aircraft off the flight deck while simultaneously launching LCACs out the back. I got to do some of the workups. I did not deploy with them, unfortunately, but we had a very proud ship. We called ourselves the best damn ship in the Navy, which I'm saying now on the current ship, but I've run out of good ideas at this point. And it's painted on the USS Arlington, best damn ship in the Navy, on the inside, and a mural. Hopefully it's still there and they haven't taken that down, but quite a bit of pride there. But wow, the amphib life is different. It's very busy. A lot of people pulling multiple duties to kind of keep that ship moving and the mission going. There's not many aviators involved, but of course you have a ton of helicopters, sometimes V-22s flying off the back, sometimes working with special operators and from various communities, and that's exciting stuff.
Big floating hotel for the Marines. Like at the end of the day, our job is to be their taxi cab and I guess hotel at the same time, right? But like we got to get them wherever they need to go in the world. And as much as we might get into our little segments of this department or that department, at the end of the day, we're all support for somebody else. I know we're excited. We're going to have our Marines coming on board a little bit more with us here in the next couple months. And yeah, they're the customer, right? You got to figure out who the customer is, who's
right. Are you guys getting ready for deployment?
Well, so yes, I don't know when I'll release this, so I won't be super specific. Yeah. But yeah, we're in that process of getting done with basic phase and still doing hurricane support, Hatter. We're currently the alert ship if something were to happen. So kind of in that role, but yeah, getting ready toward probably a summer of 25 is the current plan.
The Arlington, after I left, got pulled into hurricane support for Hatter. What does it stand for again?
Humanitarian Assistance Disaster Relief.
Disaster relief, right. They were actually third string, but the other two weren't working, whatever. So Arlington was like a great ship. We were done with the basic phase, which is a pain in the butt. And so there was all this time built in to do other things, whether it's to work with the SEALs or to respond to hurricanes. They ended up responding to an issue in Puerto Rico and provided assistance there. So that was awesome for the crew.
You talk about that sense of meaning, that sense of
mission and purpose.
Mission and purpose. I like it.
Yep.
Yeah, like we had an opportunity to support some special folks recently. At the time, I think still in basic phase. We came back finishing that up, but so there were some waivers involved and all that stuff. But
of course.
Seeing the crew, oh yeah, this is what we actually do.
Yeah.
We don't just live in the shipyard. We're coming out of it, and oh by the way, these are some really neat people and great capabilities, and they're coming to play with us and no one else. It gave that sense of mission. It was really cool.
When I put out the ship's mission, I come up with my own missions sometimes, and I try to keep them simple. For the Arlington, our mission was to send sailors and Marines ashore in bad places. So the way I could describe it is we're going to get pretty close to land. You're going to see the land, which means they can see you. They're going to fire back at you. We're probably going to take some hits while we're trying to land Marines ashore. And it's sailors driving those LCACs, right? So we're all involved. We have to work together. It's going to be dangerous. I think that the mission was easy to remember. And again, that also supports mission and purpose. Talking about the mission in your own words over and over, it helps.
We've talked about it a lot, but I want to make sure we dedicated a moment to speak about it, or even more than that, talk about Way of the Warrior Sailor. Could you kind of describe where that idea came from and what it's kind of evolved into now?
There's so many leadership books out there. They all say great things. I agree with all of them. There's also great leadership books by other military folks. A lot of SEALs put out some good stuff, but nothing truly resonated for the kind of world I live in when I'm sort of at the executive level of a lot of people. How do I drive the culture of a big ship or even a squadron? How can I distill leadership concepts down to something that's simple that I could sell, to the sailors? So I realized early on that morale was the thing. Why is it the thing? Because the greatest military commanders of all time have all said morale was the thing. Eisenhower said morale is the greatest single factor in successful war. Well, hold on a second. Morale is the greatest single factor in successful war. If that's the case, shouldn't we figure out what this means? Unfortunately, the word has been overused and misunderstood for years. Morale is about work. It's about getting recognized for work. It's about job satisfaction. It's motivation, spirit, grit, pride, all these things mixed in. It is not necessarily happiness. Happiness is great. I love happiness, but that's a chemical response in the brain. I want something deeper and spiritual, right? So the question is, how do we create morale? We don't have any leadership training on this. You're not going to have it in your career. It just doesn't exist yet. Hopefully we will get to it. And it starts with loving and valuing people. Like, you have to demonstrate it, and then people have to feel valued. It means giving them mission and purpose. They have to understand what the mission, it's got to be simple. They have to believe that no matter what job they have purpose in that mission and purpose. There's a third one I added on, which is to create wins. Like, this is easy as a leader. You know, on a boring week, you could say, this week we're going to be doing these tasks. And when the week is over, you say you've won. High five people. We all want to be on winning teams, right? It gets a lot easier when you're doing workups and you're conquering inspections. It gets easier when you're in combat, say in the Red Sea, and you're slaying the enemy. Much easier there to declare wins. It's easy at the end of a deployment to declare wins, right? So I think humans are predisposed to want to win. So why don't we give that? It's almost like a gimmick. And the game is rigged in your favor as a leader. You are both the coach and the umpire. You create the game and you decide when you won. So make it happen. So that's part of the way of the warrior sailor. It also goes into a lot of other things that support quality of life, like the fact that you need 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night at the same time, something that's circadian friendly. We have to get away, and aviation has definitely gotten away from this. We do not believe in not sleeping. That's dumb. We understand the performance impact that has on our survival in some cases, and we've had people die because they didn't sleep well. The surface community has learned this over time. They're getting much better at it, which is good. I think in the carrier world, we still have to get better. We're not even there yet, but we're fighting for it.
Have you met resistance to any of this as you kind of describe it? My brain immediately goes to exactly what you said. I've heard people brag about how little sleep they've gotten. I'm just like, dude, Are you bragging about you're underperforming? There's math and science behind this, right? There's not.
It's all science.
Yeah,
man.
you're not.
Our job is to make sure the enemy doesn't sleep. Why would we do that to ourselves? We go into combat already tired and degraded, and our reaction times are slow. We can't respond to casualties fast enough. You know, when you're dealing with a ballistic missile, you have to make a decision in 9 to 15 seconds. You cannot hesitate. And I will tell you, these destroyers on this deployment never hesitated. They did it right every time. And it's the tactical action officers, not the CO saying do it. They're just doing it through their training, which I think is admirable.
It absolutely is. But again, you've got to breed that culture of this is what right looks like, and we're going to start this way, not we're going to just flip a light switch and say, all these principles on a piece of paper or in a book, go do it. You have to actually live it every single day.
We had an example where we had to do this. So with all these alerts we were launching in the middle of the night, people were exhausted. So we had to kind of re-engineer when people were sleeping. We had to take on some risks. So we decided that we were only going to man 3 catapults and 3 arresting gear during normal flight ops. And off flight ops, we'd only do 2 and 2. So we had people sleeping at the appropriate times to support that. So most of the sailors did not have to react to an alert. They were already there. Everything was manned appropriately. It did affect the leaders because the leaders are getting out of bed to provide the oversight, but we do our best by minimizing meetings, letting people sleep in the best we can. I don't know how I did it, but I survived.
Was it caffeine? Was it those cookies? What was the secret trick?
I fought very hard to get sleep, to empower sailors to make decisions when I wasn't there, and I probably took some risks in that process.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
And you said that so casually, but I wish I could transplant that attitude and demeanor into so many, maybe not so many, some folks that I know, right? Like, yeah man, I'm here for it. That is actually what the job is to accept a little bit of that risk. Like you said, you're keeping that eye on the final prize. You're actually starting there and saying, hey, this is the mission that has to be accomplished. How do I work back from that? Not, how do I make sure all the paperwork is perfect? I hate that word comfortable. I had an instructor very early on in my career in 53, actually, and he said, stop saying if you're comfortable. Is it legal? Is it safe? You get comfortable by doing the thing repeatedly and by taking those little bites of risk manageably in a safe way, but kind of taking that word out of your lexicon.
Being comfortable when you probably should have a little bit of fear and anxiety, a little bit in any given situation, especially when you're flying aircraft. Like, you got to be on. There's a time to be off. It's post-debrief. Turn it off. Of course, then we throw a bunch of paperwork in your face and we expect perfection. You get better at that. Trust me. And then eventually, when I'm doing paperwork now, I get tons because, 3,000 requests coming up any given day. If we're doing chief evaluations, that's going to be checking 180 evaluations there. In any case, I have to trust that the people that are putting these things together are doing it right. So to be honest, I only check a few things. And then I have the person check it, like for a fit rep or an evaluation, they can look at and see the mistakes better than I can. And if we have to change it on the spot, we'll do that. No big deal. We have a process.
But that's a logical way to handle that huge administrative burden that you have.
It's the only way, because I would be here forever.
There's other ways, but I would agree. I think your way is the best way.
Yeah. But, if something's leaving the ship and it could affect the reputation of the command, I'm going to put a lot more effort into that. But when we're writing awards, that does leave the ship. Someone hangs on to that for the rest of their life. And I do worry about people in the future looking back and saying, did these guys even know how to write? But I will say I've seen so many awards, I can spot an error within 0.5 seconds and I can fix it real quick. Boom, send it back.
It is a trained skill. That's awesome.
You get better at it.
Yeah, for sure. So again, talking about historics first, maybe not for historic or a first, but something very noteworthy about this last deployment. The combat action ribbon for, was it Ike? Was it the whole strike group? How did that kind of work, and what's the significance of that award?
So the combat action ribbon was given to the whole strike group based on several incidents where the Houthis attempted to attack all the ships. And I think the criteria in there is that not only do you get attacked, but you have to respond to it, right? Fight back. We met that criteria fairly early on. I'm pretty sure an aircraft carrier has never gotten a combat action ribbon. By the way, that's 5,000 people are on board. They all got it, which is cosmic. So we're super proud of that.
There's a couple different groups on the ship that you have to trust. Say the sailors, the chief's mess, and then the wardroom, right? Could you kind of maybe give any examples of, those groups are all a little bit different. There's different roles and responsibilities, but specifically, like I said, the sailors that are actually doing the work, chiefs that are doing that level of management and a lot of, honestly, teaching, and there's a lot going on there. And then obviously the wardroom, there's a little bit of difference in all those three different groups. Any specific examples about maybe how you kind of handle those relationships? I know it's a broad question.
Yeah, it's a broad question. Expectations are going to be different for each group. For your junior officers, we're going to say, hey, you got to get good tactically. On an aircraft carrier, got a lot of people on the bridge. They have to become OODs, officers of deck, and so they have to put a lot of investment in that while still doing their normal division officer job, right? We have expectations there as well. But from the chiefs, we expect them to get things done and also train the JOs. Now, sometimes on a carrier, we have a lot of LDO JOs, limited duty officer, prior enlisted. So it's a little bit awkward there, but the Arlington, when I had a lot of first tour JOs, the expectation was the chiefs to train them and for the junior officers to listen. Let the chiefs train them. Sometimes this is new for some chiefs. They go through the chief season, their initiation process. They're told many times that you have to train the junior officers. You have to put them in the right spot. And so if you're a junior officer and you're resisting that, you're ruining the process. Like, this is a great process. Let them teach you. Sometimes they might not provide the best advice, but oftentimes they will. And then, everybody else, I say, and I don't have a good expectation here other than to say, you all signed up to become warriors. Now, you never thought that when you were signing up. You might have signed up because you wanted a college education or stability in your life, whatever. We have a million reasons why we sign up. Maybe it was to see the world, which you didn't do a hell of a lot of on this last deployment. You have many reasons, but the one implied thing is that everybody wanted to put on that uniform. They wanted to be proud to serve their country. They wanted to make their family proud. They want to be proud of themselves. They just won't say that because that's not cool to say. Be that warrior that you always wanted to be. Just be it. It's there. We've shown you the way. Make that decision. You do see a lot of sailors make that decision at some point in their career. It's usually right around the 24-year-old mark from my observation, maybe 25. They're putting on E5 and all of a sudden something clicks. And our E5s are running the Navy, right? They have so much expertise at this point. Now is the time for them to get good at the leadership stuff too. How they're treating people. Are they loving and valuing their subordinates? Are they providing them mission and purpose? Then we start grooming them for bigger leadership and more responsibility. So it's fun to watch that process happen. And it has some something to do with how the brain develops, and I don't have all the science on that, but we know what it is. We know that insurance companies bring down the fees when you turn 25 years old, and there's a reason for that.
Okay, as a helo guy, sir, I was a 53 guy, so I wasn't a Romeo aviator or Sierra pilot with those fancy missiles and guns, but I know we were all very excited for some of our own to go out and get the Talons a little bit engaged in actually defending the ship. Could you kind of speak a little bit more to that engagement with those? I think it was a Romeo, Sierra's involved, a little bit of, I'm not actually certain I know all the details, but could you kind of walk us through that?
When we were going back into the Red Sea, we had originally gone to the Persian Gulf to be a deterrent to Iran. As that was happening, the Houthis started attacking merchant vessels, and so they said, hey, we need you guys to go back to the Gulf of Aden, which was south of Yemen. We did in December, and then the decision was made to go into the Red Sea. We'd be a lot closer to the primary threat area, so we can have more influence there. So we did that on December 31st. From my perspective, on the bridge, we're doing a high-speed Strait of Bab el-Mandeb transit, middle of the night. I can't remember the exact order of events, but I know that there was a distress signal coming from a motor vessel up to the north that was allegedly getting attacked by some small boats, likely Houthi. There was also ballistic missiles fired where the Gravely shot them down. We were watching that off our bow as this was happening. We ended up launching one of our MH-60 Romeos. So there's a lot happening at the same time.
When you say watching, you mean with your eyes, not with sensors. You could literally see this occurring in front of you.
Yeah, but it was night, clear night, so we could see it fairly clear. At first, I thought I was watching a ship shooting flares. I'm like, who's shooting flares? And then it was my ensign who was with us. My one straight stick ensign from the Naval Academy was like, they're shooting back at the ballistic missile. I'm like, okay, thanks. So anyway, that happened. All this happened at the same time. We launched our MH-60 Romeo. We launched one, our Alert Romeo, and the Gravely launched one of theirs. They hooked up. They went to the site. They ended up firing back in self-defense and sunk all the small boats, and in my opinion, saved that merchant vessel.
Absolutely. And again, what a incredible skill set. You talked about, the Swiss Army knife that is this carrier. It's not always necessarily an F-18 or a Growler or a Hawkeye that's making that. It can even be I'll say it, I am a lowly helicopter pod, but we love it, right? We want to contribute just like everybody else. So how awesome that they got to do that.
They did a lot on this deployment. HSM-74, the Swamp Foxes, they were involved in rescues of mariners. They did a 24-person rescue of one sinking vessel in June. I think it was June 12th. Brought them all to the ship here, and we eventually got them off the ship. Great stories.
Did you get to interact with these folks at all? Like, what is it like when you rescued someone from a sinking ship?
We on the Ike got to interact with two separate groups. One was a single person that had done a man overboard. He was Indian, so we brought him aboard. He actually was injured. Our medical took care of him, stapled his head back together, and I got to talk to him, and I let him make a call home to his wife. What's interesting about that, he spoke a little bit of English, but mostly Hindi, and I said, hey, do we have any sailors that can speak Hindi? And they said, yeah, we have this one ABH-3, and I was like, okay, why don't you grab it? But hold on a second. How do you know she can actually speak it? And they said, well, we heard her arguing with her husband for 30 minutes in Hindi the other day. Okay, that's good enough for me. Bring her in. And so she was kind of like an interpreter for us. In June, we were involved in taking care of the people that were rescued by the Swamp Foxes in the USS Philippine Sea. So we had 24 Filipinos on the ship. We brought them down to our training classroom. We gave them lunch, Ike ball caps. We had our Catholic chaplain down there who's also from the Philippines. We had one sailor who found out that this was happening from our Filipino Mentorship Association, just a grassroots organization on the ship. There's a lot of them. And she sent out an email to all her buds and say, hey, if you speak Tagalog, come on down. We had 30 sailors show up speaking Tagalog with that crew, kind of like swarmed them, and they were singing songs in Tagalog. I've never seen anything like this, because in the Navy, like at least from my experience as a Hawkeye guy in the back of the tube, I don't get to see the people I save, this is one of those times. I have never been so proud of my life as I was that day with, how my sailors reacted and how they took care of that situation and made those people feel at home. When, by the way, they had lost one of their civilian friends in the attack that caused their ship to sink. So lost all their belongings, and it was a tough day for them. But we did the best we could to make them feel at home. That's what we do in America. That's special.
It's this, theoretically, you want to provide that impact. You literally, directly, specifically provided that impact, and how unique that you got to do that.
To see it. And to see them. To see them smile. I was fist bumping each one of them as they're leaving the ship. It was just weird.
Yeah, no, I can understand entirely. From that, this is, again, a wild pivot and quite an odd one. But one of the things that I know was kind of put out in some of the PAO guidance, located and destroyed an unmanned underwater vehicle. We talk about things that I would have never in a million years thought that was part of the threats that you were facing. One of your Growlers employed against, I don't know if it was a Hind or an Mi-17. This is stuff that is just part of warfare, but if you're not exposed to it or realize that it's actually happening, it's entirely foreign and kind of hides in the darkness.
The enemy at large is very creative, right? They're coming up with stuff to influence us, and we are just as good at countering these threats. And I mean, that's really all I can say about that.
And that's fine.
Yeah,
We'll keep it at
fine.
that. No, I like it. All right, Captain Hill, again, thank you so very much. We've gone through a bunch of different stuff tonight, not on a linear path, and I love it because we got to talk about a lot of great things. But what is next for the Eisenhower, the ship itself? What is next for you?
Eisenhower is entering a maintenance phase, part of the life cycle of the ship. We're going to go to the shipyard in a few months and hang out there for quite some time. I think it's like a year and a half possibly. Do some upgrades because the intent is to give the ship a couple more deployments. It's got more life left in it. Originally, aircraft carriers designed for only 30 years. We very quickly learned that we could extend them to 50. Now we're actually going beyond that. So based on the upgrades that we give to it.
Cool. And then what about for you, sir?
I have no idea. I'm just focusing on the next few months and making sure we're set up for the shipyard. It's a weird transition because people aren't doing the jobs they normally do, trying to keep up mission and purpose. Our mission and purpose is to get this ship ready for 2 more deployments. And we have a lot of sailors showing up now, anywhere between, like I said before, 60 to 80 per month that are going to be on those deployments. So let's set these guys up for success. I won't be here for that, but my future, I have no idea.
No worries. That's a fair, same here.
Yeah.
But again, who knows when I release this stuff, I'll know the answer to that for me. But call sign story. So Chowdah, I get a feeling, I think I might know where it comes from and what the story is, but could you...
What do you think it comes from?
Maybe the part of the world that you're from, sir, just the way you pronounce words.
So
maybe I'm wrong. Yeah.
So there was a Simpsons episode that came out right around the time I was in my first fleet squadron that I haven't even seen the episode, but it was Mayor Quimby was involved in the Simpsons, and he started saying something about it's pronounced Chowdah, not Chowder, that kind of stuff. So for whatever reason, they loved that, and I had a terrible... I wouldn't say terrible. It was a wonderful accent back in those days. I've lost most of it, honestly, and it is what it is. What's cool about it is it forces Southerners to speak with a Boston accent when they use my call sign.
That has got to be an interesting...
it works, man. It works.
That's fantastic. Well, Chowdah, again, sir, we end these all the same way. Like I said, with gratitude, thank you for taking so much time. Thank you for sharing your stories and the stories of this ship and the crew especially. And then, honestly, I hand it over to you. You get the final word. Anything I didn't ask about or anything you want to say, you get to close us out.
No, I just want to say I love what you're doing. I wish more people like you would do this, taking the risk, getting it out there. You don't get any recognition for this, right? The Navy has no program for that. This is the same for other services. I'm talking to people in the Army and the Air Force who are trying to do good stuff like you do. I did a podcast with a guy in the Army who's an EOD guy, and I love what he does. You guys are special, and you're making a difference, so just keep doing it, man. It's awesome.
Thanks, as always, for taking the time and tuning in to Safe on Deck. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It shouldn't need to be said, but just in case, I'll say it. The views and opinions presented on Safe on Deck are my own and those of my guests, and do not represent the official policy or position of the Department of Defense, the Department of the Navy, or its components. Be well, blue skies, and fly safe out there. See you next time. PCL idle, wings level. Clear, we're safe on deck.